It's late, I know, but I'm glad you're here. Tonight's story is unpleasant, and a little funny, and quietly horrifying if you let it settle in. We're drifting back to the alleyways and cesspits of medieval European cities, not the romanticized castles or sweeping battles, but the day-to-day horror of surviving your own neighborhood. Chamber pots flying from windows, rats stealing your bread, plague knocking politely at your door. If you've ever thought you were born in the wrong century, this one's for you. If you enjoy this kind of strange, soft, historical storytelling, you're welcome to subscribe, but only if it feels right. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, or what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, and let's drift back in time. Let's begin with the air. Not the politics, not the kings, just the air. Because that's the first thing you'd notice when stepping into a medieval city. It wouldn't matter whether it was London or Lubeck, Ghent or Florence. The stench would hit you like an animal. It would feel alive, violent, intimate, and it wouldn't go away. Imagine the scent of raw sewage, horse droppings, tannery runoff, rotting vegetables, mildew, and bodies, some alive, some not cooked under a heavy sun or trapped beneath the breathless damp of a cold season. No one cleaned it. It was not considered strange. This was normal. This was home. You see, most people in medieval cities didn't have what we'd call plumbing. Chamber pots were emptied into the streets, or, if you were considerate, into the open gutters. These weren't charming cobbled lanes, they were rivers of rot, and they meandered past butcher stalls, bakers' carts, and your neighbor's front door. The waste of 1,000 families and their animals mixed with rain and blood and time. There were rules against throwing waste from windows. Occasionally, some cities even had fines. But fines are for the rich, and the rich had servants to throw it further. If you were lucky, you heard a warning shout before the contents came down. If not, well, welcome to the city. But perhaps you'd adapt. People did. The human nose dulls with exposure, and yet, people wrote about it. Poets, even describing the way the stench clung to your clothes, the way it soaked into your bread if you left it out too long. Smell was not a joke then. It was a kind of diagnosis. They believed that foul odors caused illness. Miasma was the word bad air. Bad air meant death. And everyone agreed the air was very bad indeed. So they burned things to chase the scent away. Herbs, resins, incense, lavender if you were lucky, animal dung if you weren't. Perfume wasn't luxury, it was survival. But even this wasn't the whole of it. What made the city unbearable wasn't just the smell. It was that no one seemed to notice. Everyone kept going, buying turnips, complaining about taxes, flirting in alleyways, grieving, marrying, stealing, praying. Life continued under the same smell it always had. And there's something quietly terrifying about that, because it means you can get used to anything, even a world built on rot. If you stood still long enough in a medieval European city, just still, in the middle of a street, you'd start to notice something else. Beneath the odor, under the noise, even below the chaos of bartering and hoofbeats, there was always a wetness. Not rain, not the kind that refreshes or rinses away. It was a more intimate kind of wet. It soaked your boots. It clung to the hems of women's skirts. It turned the crevices of cobblestones into shallow, whispering streams. And it never seemed to dry. Cities in the Middle Ages were not built for cleanliness. They were built for proximity, crooked streets, lined with leaning buildings, jostling for sunlight and airflow. The higher the walls rose, the less air could move between them. And so the gutters stagnated. The waste lingered, liquids pooled. Some of this water came from life itself, the sloshing of chamber pots, the runoff from washing clothes, blood from slaughterhouses, the weeping wounds of the sick. The rest came from the sky. But instead of being swept away by a thoughtful infrastructure, the rain simply joined the mix. It turned every street into a grimy canal of disease and detritus. You learned, quickly, to walk the middle, or the edge, or to tiptoe across exposed beams, if you were lucky enough to live near one of the cities with wooden bridges for the wealthiest, or elevated walkways that allowed boots to remain dry, mostly, but these were few and precious. For the rest, the street was a punishment. It's easy to forget that people noticed. We imagine them too tolerant, as though they lacked our senses or our standards. But there were complaints. Complaints that have survived in letters, diaries, edicts. One chronicler in 14th century Paris described the streets as a slime of the sins of men, and well, that sounds about right. But like most things in a medieval city, the problem wasn't just dirt. It was the way people talked about dirt. To be dirty was not merely to be physically unclean, it was to be morally suspect. A kind of sin seeped into you through the mud. Poor neighborhoods were blamed not for their suffering, but for their smell. If your boots were soaked in waste, it was assumed your soul might be too. The logic was circular and cruel, and the cruelty was contagious. So cities learned to hide their rot when it mattered, when royalty visited, when religious relics were paraded through the streets, when a marriage of noble blood was to be witnessed by the public. In these moments, the gutters were scraped, the air was perfumed, the illusion was restored. But the moment passed, the streets wept again. In some cities, there were attempts halting, half-hearted, to drain the waste properly. Stone drains were dug, often by hand, often poorly. Covered channels built into roads, open only at the ends. But rats loved them. So did bacteria. These drains rarely worked, and when they did, they merely moved the problem downstream. You could say that medieval cities were trying, but more often they were simply enduring, which is perhaps the most honest thing a city can do. Endure its own dysfunction. In the quietest hours of the night, when the wind dropped and the hearth fires died, people sometimes said the streets could whisper, not in words, but in the soft sound of water moving where it shouldn't. A hush of damp secrets, the kind that soak through your souls and stay with you. You would not last a week. But then again, they did. Somehow, let's stay here a little longer. In this city that always leaks. Not because we're lost, but because the more you look, the stranger it gets. If you look up from the glistening filth of the streets, you'll see that the buildings lean. They weren't supposed to. Not at first. But wood warps. Foundations settle. And most medieval homes were built with timber frames, wattle and daub, maybe some brick or stone if you were lucky or important. And these houses were not designed with uniformity in mind. The result, streets that felt like canyons carved by drunken gods, walls that bowed out as if reaching for each other, windows that stared straight into their neighbors. Upper floors often jutted out over the street, a practice called jettying. It saved space and materials, but it also turned narrow alleys into even darker tunnels. In some places, two buildings nearly touched overhead, and when it rained, the runoff from these overhangs funneled directly onto the pedestrians below. Unless, of course, someone upstairs threw out their waste first. A child born into this world wouldn't think any of this strange. This was just what buildings looked like. But imagine stepping into that space for the first time, how close everything would feel. How dark, how damp, how loud. Because cities were loud, in ways modern ears don't expect. Not the honk of horns or the buzz of neon signs, but the shrieking of pigs being led to slaughter, the clanging of blacksmiths, church bells tolling, the hours, the deaths, the warnings, barkers calling out prices, women shouting down from windows, dogs fighting, babies crying, people moaning, some from pleasure, many from pain. And all of this ricocheted between the walls of buildings that leaned too close. Sound didn't travel far in the countryside, but in cities it bounced, it echoed, it doubled back on itself, and the smell stayed. Now think about fire, not metaphorical, real, hungry, destructive fire. Because when you pack a city this tight, with buildings made of wood, open flames inside every home, and no real fire brigade, you're asking to burn. And they did. Constantly. Records show that cities like London and Paris suffered devastating fires every few decades. In smaller towns, the losses were often total, but rebuilding was inevitable and quick. Life couldn't wait. Wood was cheap, labor was available, and insurance, well, that was not a thing yet, so people rebuilt. Sometimes better, sometimes exactly the same. There were attempts at regulation, efforts to ban thatched roofs or to widen roads, but good luck enforcing that in a city where the laws themselves often stank of desperation. Which brings us to another kind of rot, the administrative kind. Who do you think cleaned the streets? Collected the dead, maintained order in a place where half the population might not speak the same dialect? The answer is, mostly no one, or rather, a few overworked, underpaid, and usually resented individuals, tasked with the impossible. In some cities, they were called scavengers or rakers. In others, they had grander titles, but the work was always the same. Remove the mess, or at least move it somewhere else. And that somewhere else, often, it was just the river. Every city had one. It was its artery, its trade route, its lifeline, and also its sewer. Waste from homes, shops, slaughterhouses, tannerazole of it was dumped into the same water that people used to wash, cook, and sometimes drink. The same water that carried saints and soldiers downstream. The same water that smelled like nothing you've ever known. And yet they lived, laughed, fell in love, built cathedrals. That's the thing. This wasn't post-apocalyptic. It was ordinary. They painted walls with flowers. They sang. They gossiped about the neighbors. They believed in miracles. They carried charms in their pockets and told stories to keep their children quiet at night. They lived like the world wasn't decaying around them. Because what else can you do? What would you do? Stay a while, there's more. It's tempting to think of medieval filth as just an inconvenience, something you could hold your breath through. But in truth, it bled into every part of life, including death. Imagine, for a moment, that the man next door has died. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just inconveniently. Perhaps from a fever that lasted days. Perhaps from a cut that turned the wrong color. Maybe no one's quite sure what happened. It doesn't really matter. He's dead. Now imagine the aftermath. There are no ambulances, no coroners, no quiet carpeted funeral homes with polite receptionists and brochures about grief counseling. Just his family if he had one and his neighbors, who may or may not care. If he was poor, the body might lie there for days, or longer, not from cruelty, just logistics. You see, burying someone in a city wasn't always straightforward. Cemeteries were full. always. And when land is scarce, bodies become a nuisance. If you were lucky or wealthy, you might get a spot in consecrated ground, a churchyard. But even there, space was tight. Graves were shallow, and reuse was common. Dig deep enough, and you'd find someone else already waiting. There are records, dozens of them, of graveyards being exhumed en masse, bones carted away to make room for the next generation of the dead. Some were piled in ossuaries, others simply disappeared. It was not uncommon for a burial to be interrupted by a foot from an earlier occupant. And if you weren't buried quickly, well, you rotted bodies swell when left out. They weep fluids, they change color, they smell. And that smell, mixed with the already pungent cocktail of city life, was unmistakable. It was a sharp, sweet-sick odor, one that clung to fabric, that settled in the back of the throat. Some cities tried to enforce rules, limits on how long a corpse could remain unburied, fines for improper storage. But again, those fines were for people who could pay, and even those who could often found the system indifferent, overwhelmed, or simply absent. So sometimes you lived next to a corpse, for a night, for 3, for a week. And in that time, life didn't pause. Children still played in the street, bread still baked, the neighbor's dog still barked at nothing. The city kept breathing, exhaling its strange perfume of ash and flesh and open gutters, because it had to. And here's something worse. The presence of a corpse didn't always scare people, at least not in the modern way. Death was so common, so close, so visible, that it lost some of its mystery. What frightened people more was the possibility of an unclean death, one, unshriven, unconfessed, unprepared, because that meant not just rot, but damnation, not just the failure of the body, but of the soul. There were rituals, of course, prayers, candles, bells, but there were also lapses. Lives lived too fast, too poorly, too far from the church. And those deaths, the lonely ones, the unblessed ones, were whispered about, not pitied, feared. Sometimes a dead man's house would be avoided long after the body was gone, not because of ghosts, but because people believed that death, like dirt, could stick to a place, could infect it, could infect you. So maybe now you're starting to see it. The medieval city wasn't just dirty, it was intimate with decay. Death didn't happen elsewhere. It happened here, in your building, in your bed, in the room just across the hall, and you learned to live with it. Or you didn't. Not everyone did. Still with me? Good. There's more to smell, more to see. Let's keep walking. By now, the air has settled into your lungs. You've walked past the leaning houses. You've stepped over the gutter. You've tried, probably failed, to ignore the smell. And maybe, after a time, your body has begun to betray you. You start to feel hungry, but here's the thing. You don't stop eating just because your street smells like decay. You eat anyway, because your stomach doesn't care about sanitation, it cares about survival. Let's talk about food. The good news, you'd find it. Markets teemed with it. Baskets of leeks, turnips, onions, stale bread, sour cheese, meat, if you could afford it, fish that still glistened with river slime, eels, in particular, cheap, oily, plentiful. The rich might dine on swan or songbirds stuffed with spices, but the average person survived on porridge and bread and hope. The bad news, everything was dirty. Markets were not held in gleaming plazas. They happened in the same streets where animals were slaughtered, where gutters ran black, where mud was indistinguishable from feces. Vendors wiped their hands on aprons crusted with days of grease. Knives weren't sterilized. They weren't even really cleaned, and yet people feasted. There's something almost defiant in that. In sitting down to a meal when the world is visibly decomposing around you, when you can hear coughing from the next room, when you pass plague carts on the way to buy soup bones. Ah yes, the plague. It wasn't always there, but when it came, it made its presence known in ways even smell couldn't mask. The air changed, not just chemically, emotionally. Cities grew quieter, prayers grew louder. People marked their doors, sometimes to warn others, sometimes to ward off death. Red paint, white cloth, wax sigils nailed into wood, and still they ate. There's a document from the 14th century, a ledger of a household in Avignon, that records meals taken during a plague outbreak. It notes the purchase of dried figs, of salted herring, of cheap wine. There's no commentary, no moralizing, just the rhythm of survival. A list of items meant to keep someone alive one more day. And maybe that's what makes medieval city life feel so foreign. Not the death, not the disease, but the continuity, the sheer normalcy of disaster. You'd think plague would shut everything down, that hunger would disappear. But in a strange, almost tender way, food became more important during these times. It was comfort, ritual, proof that the world was still turning, that your hands still worked, that someone, somewhere, still had flour. And maybe that's why meals were so communal. You rarely ate alone in a medieval city. Space didn't allow for it. Nor did poverty. Families, neighbors, entire streets sometimes shared food, not because they were noble, but because they had to. You tore bread with your fingers. You drank from the same cup. You talked with your mouth full, because silence meant fear. And there was already enough of that. Dinner was survival, not just physically, emotionally, because when the world stinks of death, even a bowl of soup can feel sacred. So now you've eaten. Your stomach has stopped growling. Your clothes are damp. Your nose is no longer shocked by the air. You've begun, perhaps without realizing it, to adapt. But the city isn't done with you yet. The night is coming, and with it, something worse than rot, shadows, will walk there next. Night in a medieval city is not what you think it is. There are no street lamps, no soft orange halos from windows, no electric hum behind the silence. Night is thick, heavy, a physical thing that falls over you, over buildings, over roads. It consumes. You notice it all at once, how the shadows stop being shadows and start becoming everything. The air grows colder. Not clean, just cold. The rot doesn't go away. It clings to your coat, your skin, the back of your throat. But now it is quieter. Or, rather, the city is. Not still, but different. Sounds carry differently. A cough 2 streets away feels near. The creak of wood above your head makes you flinch. And with darkness comes danger. Most cities, by sundown, are supposed to be locked down. Gates closed, taverns shuttered, fires smothered. The poor huddle close in tenements. The rich light candles behind thick glass. And in theory, there are men the watch tasked with patrolling the streets, with keeping order, with keeping you safe. But theory has never stopped a dagger. Most of these night watchmen, where they existed at all, were poorly paid, poorly trained. Sometimes they were simply volunteers, exhausted tradesmen, or local boys told to walk the city with a stick and a lantern and little else. Most preferred to stay near warmth, near light. They didn't wander into trouble, which meant that, if you did, no one was coming. And trouble came fast at night. Thieves, yes, but also something more intimate. The kind of desperation that only thrives in darkness. Hunger, jealousy, boredom turned cruel. There were whispers in nearly every medieval city of night creepers, men who made their living climbing walls, slipping into windows, taking what they needed before vanishing into alleys. Some were just hungry, others were worse. And then there were the rats. At night, they owned the streets. They outnumbered you, always. Fat, clever, unafraid. They lived in the walls, in the gutters, in the bones of the city. And while you slept or tried to, they rustled. They fed, they bred. Their eyes gleamed red in the moonlight. Some cities tried to control them, bounties, rat catchers. But rats are not so easily contained. And if you think this sounds like a horror story, it was, but it was also just life. Parents warned their children not to stray after dark. Lovers met in alleyways and prayed no one followed them. Priests lit extra candles. Doors were barred, bolted. Whole neighborhoods grew silent, not from peace, but from vigilance. And yet, not everyone stayed inside. There were always figures moving through the dark. Women carrying water, men too drunk to find their beds, children with nowhere else to go, and others, stranger figures, ones with purpose you did not question. Night had its own rituals, its own economy, its own gods. You did not speak loudly at night, not even to yourself, because the city was listening, and sometimes it answered. Some things were only allowed to happen at night, not because they were secret, but because they were shameful. The darkness was where the city stored its guilt, the things it didn't want written down, the things you wouldn't tell your priest lest you had to. Violence, yes, theft, but also birth, also death, also hunger so desperate it made people chew things that were not food. Let's start with hunger, not the kind that makes you moan dramatically and reach for snacks. Real hunger, the kind that stains your thoughts, that whispers to you in dreams, that makes your teeth ache for something to grind. In every medieval city, hunger was seasonal, cyclical. If the harvest failed even slightly, prices soared. And when they soared, people sank. Bread became a luxury. Meat vanished from your table. Even porridge grew thin, then thinner, then disappeared. That's when night became opportunity. At night, you could take what you couldn't afford. You could steal a crust of bread from a window, a turnip from a cart. You could pretend you were feeding someone else, someone more desperate than you. And in the dark, you might even believe it. But the dark covered other things, too. Bodies. The plague, when it came, didn't always wait for dawn. And not every family had the strength or the courage to carry out their dead by daylight. Sometimes someone passed in the night, and sometimes they stayed where they fell. Other times they were quietly removed. There are accounts of carts being wheeled through the city before sunrise. No bells, no morning songs, just a rickety wooden bed rolling over cobblestones, collecting what was no longer needed. The driver wouldn't knock, wouldn't call out. You'd leave the body at the edge of the street, wrapped in a cloth, or not, and hope they came, and if they didn't, well, morning has its own problems. In places like 14th century Florence, entire streets emptied overnight. No fanfare, just silence. You'd go to sleep hearing coughing in the next house. You'd wake up and there'd be nothing. No clatter, no footsteps, no sounds of a fire being built. Just the wind moving through broken shutters. And sometimes, if you were brave or foolish, you'd check, and you'd find a house with no living soul in it. Or maybe not, because sometimes people didn't die. They simply fled. Night was good for fleeing, for escaping debts, marriages, reputations. You could slip away from a past, from a name, from a city that had grown too heavy. It happened more than you'd think. New names were cheap. Papers could be forged. And no one really asked questions if you kept your head down. But the darkness didn't just cover the desperate. It also cloaked the powerful. There were always men who did their business at night because daylight required honesty. They bought favors, bought silence, bought loyalty. They passed messages between cathedrals and courts. They arranged marriages, assassinations, and occasionally miracles. Night was their cathedral, their courtroom, their confessional. You wouldn't know their names, but you'd know their consequences. And above it all, the rats still ran. The dogs still barked. The roofs still dripped with water that didn't fall from rain. Night didn't fall in a medieval city. It rose, it spilled, it swallowed, and if you were still awake when it came, you did not move. You listened. Because the worst thing about the dark wasn't what it hid. It was what it revealed. There are some sounds that only exist in a medieval night. Not music, not laughter. Those belonged to day, or to taverns lit by firelight and dulled by drink. The night had its own vocabulary, its own private grammar of grief and threat and things unspoken. First came the dogs, not the pampered ones of nobility, not pets, exactly. They were half feral, street-bound, useful until they weren't. They barked at shadows, fought each other over bones and rotted meat. Sometimes they formed packs. People knew which alleys to avoid based on where the dogs had decided to gather. And if the dogs went quiet, that was worse. Then came the scratching, in the walls, beneath the floorboards. The city was porous every timber, building a half-living thing, held together with nails, rot, and the stubbornness of poor people who could not afford to rebuild. And the rats knew every path. You could hear them, running, chewing, breeding, even if you told yourself you couldn't. There were other sounds. The creak of a cartwheel far too late in the night. The sob of someone 2 rooms away, muffled by a hand or a wall or shame. The soft, unmistakable thunk of a body being lowered onto stone. And sometimes, the bells, not the grand, orchestrated peals of daytime ceremonies, but the single, solitary toll of the death bell. One ring, then another. A signal that someone had died and that someone else had noticed. But even that was rare at night. Most deaths were quiet. Most went unannounced until morning, when there was light enough to read a face or the stillness of it. Fear in the dark was not a sharp spike. It was a fog. It wrapped around you, slow and damp. It dulled the edges of things, but made every movement suspicious. You did not trust a quiet night. Something always brewed beneath it. And yet, people still lived. Still lay down beside each other in beds too small, under blankets too thin. Still whispered goodnight in words too tired to be poetic. Still dreamed, even if they were lucky. Though not always of peaceful things. Some dreamed of fire, of the city burning again, of waking to smoke, to heat, to the sound of screaming just beyond the door. Because fires were the true predators of medieval cities. They didn't sneak, they roared. And when they came at night, the damage was doubled. People disoriented, half-dressed, doors that stuck, stairs that collapsed. Entire families lost in minutes because someone knocked over a candle and no one saw. In those moments, the city didn't feel old or wise or storied. It felt like a trap, made of wood, fueled by oil, wrapped in darkness. But the worst sound of all, the one people remembered, it wasn't screaming or bells. or the shouts of men with buckets far too late. It was the silence after that stunned, ash-heavy quiet, when you realized that half the street was gone, that the bakery was gone, that the child who sold eels was gone, that a whole part of your world had vanished, and the rest of it would go on pretending tomorrow, because that was what the city did. It endured and asked you to do the same, even in the dark. Try to sleep now. The fire has passed this time. The dogs have stopped barking, or maybe your ears have finally stopped registering the sound. The street outside your shuttered window is empty, or close to it. The rats, at least, stay mostly in the walls at this hour. And your neighbor, who cried out once, hasn't cried out again. So you lie down. Your bed is straw, not golden yellow and sweet-smelling. Like fairy tales, pretend it's flattened, matted, crawling, full of things that do not sleep. Mites, lice, the occasional spider. If you're fortunate, you share it with someone, wife, husband, child. Not for love, necessarily, but for warmth. A single body cannot hold heat through the deep hours of a medieval night. You try to breathe evenly, but the air is thick. Not just with odor, though that lingers. It's thick with closeness. Walls that trap the heat of cooking fires and human skin. Roofs that drip from leaks you cannot fix. Everything feels damp, even your thoughts, and sleep is not gentle. There is no concept of a quiet mind. You pray because you must, because everyone does. Whether it brings peace is another matter. You whisper the names of saints. You beg for dreams to be kind. But dreams in this city are rarely quiet. They come to you heavy with metaphor. You dream of drowning in gutters, of coughing blood into the open street, of your child disappearing in the crowd, and no one turning to help. You dream of fires. Always the fires. They start in the base of your spine and reach up through your ribcage until you wake with a gasp. And then, of course, there are the noises. Sleep in a medieval city was not continuous. It came in pieces, if at all. 1 hour here, a snatch of rest there. The human body learned to operate in fragments. Doctors of the time called it first sleep and second sleep, separated by a strange middle period. You would wake often around midnight, sit in the dark, pray, think, tend to the fire, speak softly with whoever shared your space, or listen, and what you heard was life, oddly tender sometimes. The cough of an old man 2 rooms away, a woman singing low to herself, a child whispering to a doll. These were not loud sounds, but they reminded you that others, too, were surviving the night, and other times the sounds were not tender, a crash, a scream, the wet thud of a fall from a second-story window. You do not rise. You cannot. You are too afraid, or too tired, or simply used to it. That's what the city does best. It teaches you not to flinch. Eventually, sleep returns. Not because you are safe, not because you are soothed, but because your body gives up. It slips under like a drowning man, quietly and without resistance. And for a little while, there is nothing, no smell, no hunger, no fear, just the hush of forgetfulness. And if you wake to morning, well, that's a kind of miracle. Even if the streets still stink, even if the rot has crept a little closer to your door, you survived the night, and that is no small thing. Not here. Morning does not arrive gently in a medieval city. It does not creep in with golden beams or soft bird song. It does not wait politely at the window, asking permission. It barges in, you hear it first. The shouting of vendors setting up their stalls. The groan of wooden carts rolling over stone. the whinny of overworked horses, the slap of a broom against a stoop. The city reanimates, not like a person waking up, but like something being reassembled loudly, piece by clattering piece. And with the sounds come the smells, again, fresh, somehow sharper in the cold morning air. Bread rising, yes, but also the sourness of beer gone flat. The iron temps of blood from the butcher's block. The distinct, eye-watering punch of human waste fermenting when no one moved it in time. Your first breath of the new day is always involuntary. It reminds you where you are. If you step outside, say, to fetch water, you step over stains, puddles that were not there yesterday, a smear that might be wine or something else, a pile of straw blackened by something best not named. You avoid looking too closely, because in every city there is a quiet agreement. Whatever happened in the night belongs to the night. There may be signs of violence, a shutter hanging loose, a bloodied cloth in the gutter, a man sitting too still against a wall. You glance, then you move on. The day has its own rules. It demands momentum. You must work. You must trade. You must survive until sunset, when everything becomes uncertain again. And so the city pretends it is clean, pretends it is well, pretends that the night was only a bad dream, poorly remembered. But the truth is, the night never really ends. It lingers, in the expression of a woman drawing water, eyes darting, in the twitch of a child's hand as they walk too near a shadowed door, in the way shopkeepers mutter to themselves as they sweep, not in annoyance, but in warding. And the watchmen, those ghostly figures of supposed protection, have vanished. No shift change, no report, just gone, as if they were never there. You suspect, correctly, that many of them never patrolled at all, that their torches burned quietly in corners while the city defended itself. So the city begins again, not renewed, just repeated. And if you look up, past the crooked rooftops and sagging windows, you might catch a brief moment of sun, pale and thin, more suggestion than warmth. You close your eyes. You breathe in the scent of baking bread, trying to focus only on that. You ignore the blood, the rats, the secrets behind doors. You made it through the night. But the day is its own kind of dangerous. We'll walk through that next. By now, you've seen what the dark hides. Let's talk about what the light reveals. Because despite the fear, the filth, the fetid water winding down its alleys, a medieval city is not quiet. It is never quiet. Not in day, not in dusk, not even during prayer. The moment the sun has risen, the city begins to speak again, loudly, without shame, and with 1,000 different voices. Start with the walls. Yes, the actual walls. Not just the stone perimeter that encircles the city, though those are worth a glance. Pocked with arrow slits, scarred by sieges, always being patched. No, I mean the walls of the buildings themselves, cracked, timbered, leaning dangerously into the street. They listen. They absorb every scream, every bell, every drunken serenade, every whispered confession made behind doors too thin to keep secrets. They all live in the grain of the wood. If you press your ear to them, you might imagine you can hear the past, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong, because the city's past is loud, clamorous, cluttered. Now, step into the street. The sounds layer themselves like fabric. First, the bells, always the bells, tolling time, tolling mass, tolling warnings, tolling deaths. They divide the day into slices of obligation and superstition. Work begins when the bells say so. Meals, too, and prayer. and mourning. If a bell tolls at the wrong time, people look up. Something's happened. Next, the tradesmen. They shout, not in marketing slogans, but in blunt, guttural cries, words shortened by use, flattened by accent. The fishmonger calls out his morning catch, scales still shining. The baker hammers his wares into the street with the scent of flour and smoke. The butcher does not call. His shop speaks for itself: flies, bones, a bloody apron. Then come the sounds of metal, a blacksmith hammering iron into horseshoes or tools. The ring of steel on steel, sharp and satisfying. Children imitate it with sticks. Old men pretend not to wince when it reminds them of other sounds: war, rebellion, loss. Horses clatter past, sometimes pulling carts, sometimes not. Most of them stink. You do not ride unless you are wealthy or in a hurry or foolish. The rest of the city walks, and walking has its own rhythm. A shuffle, a slap of boot leather against stone, the wet suck of mud pulling at a sole. It creates a kind of percussive heartbeat, and above it all, always, is the human voice. Mothers scolding, children laughing, arguments escalating, prayers muttered under breath, the singing of nuns through narrow chapel windows, the wailing of a widow who has not yet learned to cry silently. 1,000 voices crashing into one another like waves against a cliff. This is what life sounds like here, not peaceful, not ordered, but full, crammed with proof of existence. And for all its horror, there is something moving in that. The city is not dead. It might rot, it might cough, it might poison its own people, but it lives, it insists on it, even when it shouldn't. We'll follow that noise a little deeper next, into the markets, into the crowds, into the spaces where bodies press together and secrets go unnoticed. There's something waiting there, something you wouldn't expect. The market square is the heart of the medieval city. It does not beat, it thrashes. Forget any image of quaint stalls and orderly rows of vegetables under fluttering canvas. The medieval market is chaos, with structure barely controlled, endlessly repeated, and as vital to the city as blood is to a body. It is not a place. It is a condition, and you can hear it before you see it. Voices hundreds layered like sediment. Men hawking iron nails and barley. Women shouting over one another for better prices on dried beans. Pigs screaming in protest as they are carried or dragged or displayed. Chickens live or almost live flapping in baskets. Toddlers wailing. Coins clinking. Arguments beginning or finishing. It is a soundscape of need. People come here not because they want to, because they have to. Markets are obligation. You buy or you don't eat. You sell or you starve. Even the smallest item, an egg, a turnip, a pinch of dried rosemary is bartered like it matters, because it does. And everything is touched. No plastic wrap, no sanitized packaging. If you want to buy a goose, you grab its feet. If you want a head of cabbage, you feel its weight in your hand. If you want wool, you run your fingers through it, coarse, greasy, rich with the scent of animal. The market smells like hands, mostly. Hands that have not been washed. Hands that have held everything. And everything costs too much. Always. Because the merchant has to eat too. Because the roads were dangerous this month. Because the baker's wife is ill and they need coin for candles. Because the tanner raised his prices. Because the weather insulted the crops. Because of reasons. Prices are not posted. They are guessed, asserted, argued. You do not whisper in a market. You do not wait patiently. You perform, especially if you're poor. There's no room for dignity here, not the modern kind. You beg, or you bluff, or you borrow. You trade gossip as currency. You lie about how much silver you have. You pretend you weren't just robbed yesterday. Everyone knows. Everyone pretends not to. But the market is not just commerce. It's theater. It's a parade of survival. You'll see a man selling relics of saints. No one can name splinters of wood, clumps of hair, cloudy glass said to be from the chalice of Christ. You'll see a woman reading fortunes from sheep guts, hunched beneath a sheet of waxed cloth, her fingers stained red. You'll see boys lifting apples with one hand while making eye contact with you, daring you to say something. And somewhere, always, a pickpocket. Sometimes a child. Sometimes a soldier turned nothing. Sometimes an old woman whose fingers move too fast for someone who claims to be blind. You don't catch them. You don't stop them. You just clutch your pouch and hope it's still there when you turn the corner. This is the city in full exposure. Everyone here, every class, every age. There are no secrets in the market. But somehow everything is hidden. A man might sell poison under the guise of bomb. A woman might carry a letter stitched into her hem. A child might be more than he seems. The market does not judge, it only demands. And beneath the noise there is music. Not played, not sung, but present. The rhythm of barter, the cadence of survival, the offbeat beauty of people doing what they must, because they can, because they have no choice. You wouldn't last long here, not if you hesitated, not if you waited your turn, not if you expected fairness, but if you really watched, you might see something extraordinary. The city, at its loudest, is also the most human. We'll stay here a little longer. There's a story hiding in the noise. In a medieval market, words are currency, not just coins. Words, stories, whispers, curses, blessings. Everyone is listening, even when they pretend not to be. The butcher's apprentice learns who is sleeping with whom before he learns to sharpen a blade. The baker's daughter knows which merchant was caught cheating waits again. The widow selling onions always knows who coughed blood last night, and how many days ago their sister died. Gossip is not idle here, it is defense, it is infrastructure. Because the city doesn't have a newspaper. It doesn't have bulletins, or announcements, or reliable town criers. What it has is people, talking, constantly. And the market is where that web is, spun day after day, tangled, sticky, crucial. It's also where people remember God, not abstractly, not politely, visibly, loudly. You'll see it in the way hands cross, foreheads, shoulders, hearts, almost rhythmically. In the way bread is kissed before eating. In the way the names of saints are muttered like punctuation between prices. By Saint Apollonia, the cheese is dear. For the love of Saint Jude, put that chicken down. Saint Sebastian protect you, he's drunk again. Religion isn't separate here. It's woven into the market stall, the prayer flags tied to baskets, the carved crucifix hanging between sausages and salted cod. Sometimes, the line between sacred and mundane gets blurry. A monk might be selling relics. Real or not, it doesn't matter. A priest might be arguing over the price of lentils. A nun might be buying wine with money from a donation box, wrapped in a cloth to avoid suspicion, because even the godly must eat. And everyone, godly or not, buys garlic. It's in everything. Crushed, hung, braided. For food, yes, but also for medicine. For protection, for keeping out bad humors, evil spirits, and nosy neighbors. Some people wear cloves around their neck. Some rub it on doorposts. Some leave it in their shoes. The market always smells like garlic, no matter what else is rotting. It mingles with sweat, with the salt of preserved meats, with the sour punch of unwashed cloth. It becomes a part of you, whether you want it or not. But the most powerful smell in the market isn't garlic. It's fear, not obvious, not loud, but ever present. The fear of not earning enough today, of catching something, of losing your spot, your goods, your coin purse. The fear that someone will recognize you or not recognize you, that someone will speak your name too loudly. Markets expose you. They force you to be visible, to perform, and some people can't, or won't, or shouldn't, so they stand at the edges. Watchers, quiet figures who take up space without participating. No one asks them why they're there. No one wants to know, because everyone has a reason for being in the market. Even the ones who don't buy anything, even the ones who never leave. And if you linger too long near them, those still, silent ones, you might feel your throat tighten, as if the air itself is trying to tell you something. Something about what came before you, something about what's coming next. The market never says it out loud, but it always knows. Words aren't the only thing that moves through a medieval city. Hands speak, too. They say things out loud, in the open, that mouths dare not. They flash, signal, offer, warn. They lie, they beg, they barter, they pray. A hand can end a life here, but most of the time, it just tries to get by. Watch them closely and you'll start to see the city's true conversations. The fishwife's hands are cracked, pink at the knuckles, always wet. She flicks blood and scale with practiced indifference, never pausing between insults. The scribe's fingers are ink-stained, calloused in strange places. He gestures too delicately for the street. He gets jostled. He gets mocked. Children's hands dart like birds, fast, grubby, opportunistic. They pinch apples, tug sleeves, pocket crumbs. When they get caught, the hands go behind backs, innocent, empty. Until tomorrow, the hands of the poor are always moving, always doing something, shelling peas, sorting rags, tending fires. They can't afford stillness. Stillness invites notice, and notice invites questions, and questions, well, the hands of the rich are still, or if they move, they do so slowly, deliberately. They hold gloves they do not wear. They brush invisible dust from their sleeves. They hold rosaries more for show than for salvation. And there are other hands, stranger ones. The apothecary's hands, stained yellow and green from crushed herbs. The tanner's hands, reeking of piss and lime. The gravedigger's hands, always damp, even in sunlight. They carry the touch of their trade long after the tools are gone. And yet, for all their differences, hands meet in moments of shared need. One palm extended for a coin, another to shake in agreement, another to strike, another to soothe. Touch, in a medieval city, is complicated, dangerous, necessary. People live close, too close. Families share beds. Strangers share benches. Sweat runs down arms and mingles. Lice travel across shoulders without asking. Touch becomes both threat and comfort. You cannot avoid it, and you cannot live without it. At market, hands negotiate before mouths do. A seller places a coin on his tongue, kisses it for luck, presses it into your palm. You wince, but take it, because it's real, because it's heavy, because it might be the only one you get today. A lover brushes a hand across a shoulder in passing. No words, just a glance. Just a reminder. A mother clutches a child's wrist hard enough to bruise, not from anger, but fear. Because losing a child in this crowd is not an abstraction. It happens, and the ones taken don't always scream. Hands pray, too, sometimes to saints, sometimes to no one. Just fingers laced together in the hope that someone is listening. And some hands don't move at all. They hang from sleeves in alleys. They reach out from behind stalls. They lie still on tables in back rooms where no one is supposed to be. The city speaks with its hands. You just have to look closely and be ready for what they're trying to tell you. Every medieval city has its ghosts. Not the kind with chains and wails, though people believed in those, too. These are quieter. Echoes, mostly, stories, sounds, fragments of lives that never got properly packed away. You can hear them in the empty spaces, in the gaps between noise, especially in the spaces where nothing should be quiet. Like the well, every city has one, or several, round, stone-lipped, always damp, not picturesque, not clean. They're more like mouths than fountains, dark, wet, echoing. They carry voices. Drop a pebble in, and you'll hear it strike something soft before the splash. Moss, or something else. The water down there isn't just for drinking. It receives waste. Corpses, sometimes, secrets. People speak near the well because they believe the water can't hear them. But they forget. Water remembers. Children dare each other to climb the lip. Some fall in, not many return. The well doesn't scream, it just waits. Then there's the square. Earlier in the day, it was a market. Now it's changed. The stalls are being broken down. Straw and rot cling to the edges. But the square still hums, not with commerce, with aftermath. This is where they hold the hangings. Not every day, not even every week, but regularly enough that the wood of the gallows is familiar, smoothed by time, darkened by rain, blood, and the touch of too many hands. It's not raised high, just high enough. When it's not in use, children play near it, climb it, pretend, because what else do you do with a structure like that? Some cities try to hide their justice. Others display it proudly. The hanging rope is never taken down. A reminder, a warning, a quiet, swinging memory. And then there's the alley. Every city has at least one, the one no one talks about. The one that smells wrong even on cold days. The one where shadows fall at odd angles. Maybe it's where the plague hit worst. Maybe it's where a fire started. Maybe it's just cursed. People walk faster when they pass it. Children are told not to enter, not because of superstition, exactly, but because people have learned, when something feels wrong in a city, it probably is. These echoes aren't kept alive on purpose. No one writes them down, but they linger. In songs sung half under breath. In chalk marks on a door that never get washed off. In the way old women spit over their left shoulder when a certain name is spoken. You don't last in a medieval city by ignoring the noise. You last by listening, not just to what's said, but to what isn't, to what the walls remember, to what the hands imply, to what the well holds, to what the square forgets, to what the alley keeps. The city never sleeps, and it never forgets who's listening. Let's stop pretending. Let's stop imagining that you could pass through this place untouched, because the truth is your body would betray you. It already has. The sores, the cough, the way your stomach turned when you first stepped into the street and hasn't quite settled since. You might think you could handle this century if you had good boots and strong lungs. But your body doesn't care about your optimism. It keeps score. Let's start with the skin. You think of it as a barrier. something to keep the world out. But in a medieval city, the skin is a sponge. It absorbs the air, the rot, the fear, and it pays for every contact it makes. Within days, your legs would be swollen with bites, fleas, bedbugs, lice. They don't just live in straw mattresses, they thrive there. If you're lucky, they stay in the folds of your clothing. If you're not, they nest in your hair. You'll start to itch constantly. The scratching becomes rhythmic, meditative. Everyone does it. No one comments. It's not shameful, just expected. A quiet acknowledgement that your body is losing its war with the environment. Then the boils come. Not always, not for everyone, but often enough that you start to look for them. Red, tender spots that bloom along the thigh, beneath the arm, behind the knee. They swell, they pulse, they darken, and when they break, they leave behind a smell you will never forget. Sometimes it's plague, sometimes it's not. Doesn't matter. No one wants to get close enough to find out. Clothing doesn't help. Wool itches, linen tears, leather cracks. You wear the same garments for weeks. They grow heavy with sweat, with city soot, with the oil of unwashed skin. You learn to ignore the dampness beneath your arms, the way your hem stiffens with filth. If your shoes were new, they won't be for long. Cobblestones chew them, gutters soak them, rats nibble when you're too still. Your skin is not your own anymore. It belongs to the city. But it's not just what you wear or what you smell like. It's what you're made to endure. Pain here is not rare. It is not treated. It is not managed. To live in a medieval city is to be in pain constantly, quietly, without complaint. The ache in your back from carrying water. The burn of smoke in your eyes from 100 tiny fires. The bruise on your shoulder from a jostle that turned into a shove that no one apologized for. The splinter from a cart. The cut from a knife. The missing tooth from a fight you didn't start and didn't win. And illness, it doesn't arrive as a warning. It comes like weather. Suddenly, from nowhere. A fever, a cough, a stiffness in the neck. You tell yourself it's nothing. But your neighbor had the same cough last week, and now their window has been shuttered for days. So you pray, not because you think it will stop the pain, but because prayer is what you do when the body fails. You light a candle and murmur the name of a saint's aid, Rock for plague, Saint Apollonia for toothache, Saint Lucy for the eyes. You beg quietly, you trade pain for hope, because in this city, that's the only exchange rate that never changes. The body breaks, it always breaks, but it remembers who hurt it, and it remembers who didn't. We'll follow that pain a little deeper next, down into the bones, into the ways the city rewrites its people. Pain becomes routine in the medieval city, but suffering real long, bone-deep suffering, that's where the city leaves its signature, not on the surface, not in the bruises that fade, but in the bones, quietly, slowly, permanently. Archaeologists, Tadithos grave whisperers, know this well. They lift the dead out of churchyards and plague pits and communal graves with careful fingers, and the bones tell them everything. They know who carried water to Yunk. You can see it in the curve of the spine, bent before adulthood. They know who ground grain by hand for decades. It's in the smooth grooves of the knees and hips, worn from hours spent kneeling at the mill. They know who went hungry, rickets, stunted growth, porous femurs, bones that never reached their full potential. Because even the dead, it seems, remember what the city did to them. And if the bones show damage-healed breaks, Infected wounds, it means something oddly tender. They survived long enough to scar. Someone kept them alive, or tried to, but many didn't, and the bones that didn't get time to knit themselves back together. They lie in clusters beneath buildings that now sell coffee and postcards. They weren't buried with dignity, just buried. If you lived here truly, lived here, your skeleton would one day join the choir beneath the city. Your joints would record your labor, your teeth would confess your poverty, your ribs would hold the story of every winter you barely survived, and in life you'd feel it all. The way your knees grind when you stand too fast, the way your fingers ache on cold mornings, the way your shoulders slump from years of carrying burdens, literal and otherwise, but you wouldn't talk about it. Pain here is not dramatic. It is not a plot twist. It is background noise. People don't say, "I'm in pain." They say, "It's been a long day." Or they say nothing. They just stretch a little slower, limp a little more, grunt when they sit. And even that is a luxury, because some bodies aren't allowed to grow old. Childbirth kills, infection kills, violence kills. Your own teeth can kill you. A bad cut on your foot can become a rotting wound. A simple fever can twist into delirium, then stillness. There are no clean hospitals, no painkillers, no sanitation. If you're lucky, someone gives you a rag to bite. If you're luckier, someone holds your hand while you scream. And if you're luckiest, the pain stops before you have to beg for it. But here's the secret the city won't tell you. The pain isn't just suffering, it's connection. Every limp, every cough, every crooked spine is a reminder. You're part of something. You belong to the city because it has shaped you. Quite literally, it has molded your body to fit its rhythm. You cannot live in this place and remain unchanged. You wouldn't last a week. Not because of weakness, but because you would become the city too quickly. And once the city has you, truly has you, it doesn't give you back. Your bones would stay, even if you left, even if you died far from here, even if no one remembered your name. The city would remember your shape, and that would be enough. Let's keep going. There's more the body has to teach us. Let's talk about teeth. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's honest. The mouth is a battlefield in the medieval city, not a metaphorical one. A literal, painful, foul-smelling war zone. You would not last a week here because by the end of it, your jaw would ache in places you didn't know could ache. And not because of sugar. Sugar, when it appears at all, is medicine. Expensive, imported, exotic. The average person in a medieval city doesn't rot their teeth on sweets. No, their teeth rot because of everything else. The bread, for one. Most bread is coarse, not rustic or artisanal, just gritty, often made with flour ground on stone wheels that leave behind trace minerals, grit, sand, dust. Over time, it acts like sandpaper against enamel. People lose their molars by 30, so they chew with what's left, or they don't chew at all. And if a tooth breaks, cracks, gets infected, that pain becomes your life. There are no dentists here, not in the modern sense. You might find a barber surgeon, a man with a chair, a hook, a cloth to bite. He'll pull the tooth. He might bleed you first, because he believes it will help. If he's feeling generous, he'll give you a mouthful of strong wine or a clove to chew before the extraction. No anesthesia, just the hook and silence after. Some people carry their teeth in pouches afterward, tiny trophies of survival. Others believe they hold spiritual power. A lost tooth, like a lost bone, must be buried properly, or it will find its way back into your dreams. You begin to speak differently. Shorter words, less laughter. Smiles become rare because open mouths reveal too much. Decay is shameful, and nearly everyone carries that shame. Mouths are private, but they are also political. The way you speak tells people everything: where you're from, how long you've been hungry, how many teeth you've lost. Accent is class. Vocabulary is geography. Silence is a shield. The church notices this. Priests listen carefully to your confessions, not just the content, but the delivery. A stutter might suggest possession. A thick dialect might suggest heresy. There are priests who preach in Latin to congregations that speak only Breton or Dutch or Welsh, and the people nod, because nodding is safer than being noticed. Even prayer becomes physical. The taste of incense on your tongue, the crack of dry bread pressed against your palate, the wine's thin, bitter burning down your throat in sips you pretend to savor, and always the teeth. Loose ones you push with your tongue, missing ones you chew around, blackened ones you try to hide. They tell your story more honestly than you ever will, because your mouth doesn't lie. Not here, not now. Not in a city where words are heavy and pain has its own language. You want to speak, you'd better be willing to bleed for it. Let's sit with that for a while. We'll move next to the heart and the strange ways it learns to survive. Let's pause at the chest, beneath the skin, beneath the ribs. Let's find the heart. You wouldn't think this city has room for it, would you? You wouldn't imagine a place this filthy, this desperate, would make space for something so fragile. But the truth is, it does. It has to, because the body can only survive so much with bone and blood alone. What carries you through the rot, the hunger, the pain, the unbearable ache of being alive? Here is something quieter. It pulses just beneath the horror, and it learns. In a medieval city, the heart is a quick study. It learns not to startle, not to race at every scream or crash or whisper, because if it did, it would burn out before you reached midday. Instead, it finds a different rhythm, slower, heavier, more deliberate. It learns the sound of hoofbeats in the distance and doesn't panic. It learns the difference between joyful shouts and violent ones. It learns when to hope and when to stop hoping. It protects you, not from death, but from the constant anticipation of it. This kind of heart is different than ours. Modern hearts beat fast. We rush, we worry, we ache from expectation. But here, in the city of rats and rain and rot, the heart becomes stiller, not dead, just focused, like a sentry watching the door. And it breaks differently, too, not in a single moment, not in dramatic collapse. Here, the heart breaks by degrees, quietly, like water wearing down a stone. A loved one coughs for a few too many days. A sibling goes out to work and doesn't come back. A baby dies before it learns to speak your name. A friend is arrested and never seen again, and nothing happens. No one fixes it. No one consoles. The world does not stop. So the heart doesn't shatter. It folds. It reshapes. It becomes something new. That is grief here, not a storm, but erosion. The people who survive are the ones whose hearts have found ways to harden without turning cruel, to numb without forgetting. They tell jokes. They tell stories. They sing songs with endings that don't make sense. Not because they are happy, but because they are still human. Because humanity in this city is a form of resistance. Laughter is radical. Kissing someone's wrist in public is brave. Burying a child with a coin in their hand for the ferryman even, when you're not sure if you believe any more is devotion. And sometimes the heart does stop, not from plague or trauma, but from too much, too many losses, too much fear. The old woman who sat on the same step every morning, who fed the birds crusts of bread she could not spare, one day she just doesn't rise. No illness, no sign of harm, just silence. Her heart folded itself too many times. There are no diagnoses here, no autopsies, no names for these kinds of deaths. But the city knows. It remembers the places where hearts gave out. It holds them like secrets. A corner where a boy fell, a wall where a girl leaned too long, a doorway no one will sit in again. Even if no one speaks it aloud, the city keeps the memory, because pain doesn't vanish. It settles, in brick, in dust, in the space between two heartbeats. Your heart would try to survive here, it really would, but after a week, maybe less, it would start to change. And that's what's so quietly horrifying. Not that you'd die, but that you'd live, and become this place, one heartbeat at a time. Let's go deeper still. There's one more body to visit, one more piece of you the city wants to keep. Now we reach the lungs. You can stop pretending they're fine. You can stop pretending the air here hasn't already changed you, because it has. Every breath in this city is an offering and a risk. And your lungs, soft and pink and foolish, are not ready. Not for this. The air is never clean. Even in the morning, even after a rain, there's no such thing as fresh. It's just a different shade of dirty. It might carry the scent of bread, of lavender stuffed into doorways, of incense trailing from a church window. But it also carries the black powder of chimney soot, the acrid bite of boiling urine from the tanner's yard, the copper salt smell of blood from the butcher's block. And that's on a good day. On a bad day, the air thickens, with rot, with smoke, with illness. Because in a medieval city, disease doesn't hide. It rides the breath of every passerby. You can smell it, sometimes, before you see it. A child with a wet cough, a man coughing up blood behind a tavern, a woman who hasn't spoken in days, who stares blankly from a window, her mouth opening like a fish, lungs too full to cry. The air is intimate here. It passes between people without permission. You inhale what they exhale, what they fear, what they die from. The city knows this. It even tries, in its way, to cleanse itself. Herbs are burned in street corners, not because it works, but because it gives the illusion of control. Juniper, rosemary, sage. The smoke curls around ankles, creeps up stairways. People walk through it like they believe it can protect them. Some carry nosegays, small bundles of sweet-smelling things held beneath the nose. It's not fashion, it's survival, or the illusion of it. But no smoke, no cloth, no prayer can stop the truth. The city is in your lungs now. You wheeze when you walk uphill. You cough in your sleep. You wake with phlegm in your throat that doesn't go away. You breathe in soot and breathe out resignation. And over time, you forget what clean air ever felt like. You adjust. Even the smell of burning bodies when the plague comes is something you get used to. You hate yourself for it. But your lungs, like the rest of you, are obedient. They adapt. And there's something darker. You start to feel protective of the air here. It's yours. It belongs to this place, this time, this endless, filthy theater of survival. When you imagine clean air, now mountains, oceans, trees, it feels like a memory someone else gave you, a fairy tale, a lie. You begin to believe this is what air is supposed to be. You begin to believe the burning, the rotting, the wheezing is just life. That's what the city does. It teaches you to need the things that hurt you, slowly, quietly, one breath at a time. So no, you wouldn't last a week. Not because you'd die, but because you'd stop noticing. Your lungs would betray you with their silence. They would settle into the rhythm of the city, and they would never ask to leave. Let's keep walking. The city's not finished with you yet. Let's talk about thirst. It comes faster than you'd expect. Hunger you can postpone. Pain you can ignore. But thirst is insistent. It sharpens, it scratches. It taps its knuckles against the back of your throat until you notice it. And in a medieval city, noticing it is the first mistake. Because there is water. There are wells, of course. Springs, sometimes. Rain collected in buckets or barrels lined with moss and mold. There are public fountains chipped, overflowing, sometimes sacred, sometimes not. Some cities even have lead pipes bringing water down from hills. Roman inventions left like bones behind the empire. So yes, there is water, and none of it is safe. Not really. Wells are often shallow, too close to latrines, too close to graveyards. Water seeps through soil, carrying secrets. A child dies of fever, buried with quicklime, and a week later the neighbor starts coughing. No one connects the dots. They just say it's the season, bad air. God's will, rainwater at least, feels clean, but it's not. It runs off roofs covered in soot, bird droppings, the dust of 10,000 sighs. Barrels turn green if you don't drink fast. And once they do, they stay that way. Scrubbing is for people with time, with soap, with hope. So what do people do? They boil. If they can afford fuel, they add herbs. They drink ale, small beer. They call it barely alcoholic, barely fermented, weak, cloudy, and always safer than the stuff that drips from stones. Children drink it. Pregnant women drink it. Monks brew it. Soldiers guzzle it. It's not for drunkenness. It's for not dying. But even beer turns. It sours fast, especially in summer. You drink it anyway. And if you have to drink water, you bless it. You whisper a prayer as it passes your lips. You hope the saints are listening. You pretend your stomach is stronger than your neighbor's. You tell yourself you're not one of the ones who'll get sick. But the sickness still comes. Dysentery, cholera, fevers unnamed. People bend double with cramps. They empty themselves until they're too weak to move. They drink more water, desperate, and the cycle starts again. There are those who try to help. Herbalists, midwives, healers with jars of strange powders and hands that smell like roots. They know which leaves to steep, which bark to boil. They don't promise cures, only chances. And sometimes that's enough. And then there are the others, the ones who sell miracle cures, bottles of rust-colored liquid sold with a smile and a lie. Holy water from the Jordan, they claim. Blessed by a bishop, they say. You drink it, you believe, you die anyway. Because the truth is, the city doesn't care if you're thirsty. It doesn't care if you believe. It only cares that you keep drinking, that you keep surviving, that you keep your mouth full, even if it kills you. You would not last a week here, because you expect water to give life. But here, it only gives you time. And time, in this place, is not a gift. It's a dare. Let's stay with that. Let's talk about food next. What people eat, and what they don't. If thirst is cruel, hunger is intimate. It moves in slowly, not with the sharpness of pain, but with the gentleness of forgetting. You forget what fullness feels like. You forget what your favorite food was. You forget what it's like to stop eating because you're satisfied, not because the bowl is empty. In a medieval city, hunger is not dramatic. It's not the kind that drops people in the street, at least, not at first. It's the kind that rewrites your day, your thoughts, your body. You wake thinking of bread. Not cake, not sweets, not roasted meats or honeyed pears bread. Hard, cracked, heavy. The good stuff is made from wheat, white and soft, saved for feast days or the rich. The rest is barley, rye, millet, oats, whatever could be milled that season, whatever hasn't gone to rats or mold. You eat bread with everything. If you're lucky, it's dipped in ale. If you're not, it's dipped in water that makes your stomach twist. And if there's no bread, there's porridge. A paste of grains, sometimes flavored with scraps of onion, or the memory of onion. Meat, rare, salted, usually preserved in ways that make it nearly unrecognizable. Pigs are popular, so are eels. You eat what can be caught, what won't scream too loud, what won't eat you first. And vegetables are not what you think. There's no kale salad, no roasted root medley. Vegetables are boiled until they lose their names. You eat cabbage, leeks, turnips, because you can grow them, and they don't complain. Peas, when the season allows. Beans, if you're lucky. Onions are treasure. Garlic, salvation. You eat what you have, not what you want. And there are rules, written and unwritten. The church tells you what you can eat on which days. No meat on Fridays. Fasting during Lent. No indulgence during Advent. If you break the rules, you confess, or you don't. The city is too hungry to notice your sins. Sometimes there are feast days, holy days, weddings, saints' birthdays, the rare moments when the tables overflow. Roasted meats, spiced wine, sweet pastries made with lard and dried fruit. And for a single day, people eat until they don't ache. But the next morning, the hunger comes back. Harder, sometimes, because it remembers. The worst hunger is seasonal. Spring is lean. Winter's stores have run low. Summer's bounty is still green. You chew dried roots. You boil bark. You steal. People don't talk about it, but they do eat things they shouldn't. Cats, dogs, birds that fall from the sky. Leather boiled until it softens. And once, in the quiet corners of famine, things worse than that. They don't write it down, but the bones remember. Hunger is not just physical, it is psychological. It shortens tempers, it kills joy, it turns neighbors into strangers. It makes theft forgivable, it makes generosity sacred. A man who shares an apple becomes a saint. A woman who saves the last piece of bread for her child is a miracle. Because here, food isn't just fuel, it's story, it's survival, it's self. You wouldn't last a week, not because you'd starve, but because hunger would change who you are, and you wouldn't recognize yourself when it's done. Let's keep walking. There's something else you need to see, where food ends and filth begins. No one wants to talk about waste. Not in modern cities, and certainly not in medieval ones. But it's there, unavoidable, undeniable. The final chapter of every meal, the end of every hunger. The thing no prayer, no pageantry, no saint can save you from. What happens after your body has taken what it needs. Let's talk about filth. It doesn't disappear. It never has. It has to go somewhere. And in a medieval city, that somewhere is everywhere. There are no toilets. Not really. If you're rich, you might have a garderobe, a narrow chute built into the wall of your home, often hanging over a street, a moat, or nothing at all. It smells, it leaks, It splashes, but it is private. That is a luxury. For everyone else, the chamber pot. A simple clay vessel, sometimes carved, sometimes cracked, kept under the bed, near the hearth, behind a curtain. You use it, you cover it, you forget about it, until it's time, and then you dump it. Out the window, often. Into the alley, into the gutter, onto the street, where it mingles with rain and animal waste and yesterday's blood from the butcher's stall. It's not personal, it's not cruel, it's just the system. Some cities have rules. You're supposed to yell first, Gardez-vous in Edinburgh, allo in Paris, look out below, in rougher tongues, a warning, a brief moment of mercy. But people forget, or they're drunk, or they're lazy. And even when they shout, it's often too late. You learn to walk close to buildings, to wear a hood, to keep your eyes up and your mouth closed, because sometimes it's not water. And yet, the city goes on. The streets are scraped when someone has time. Ash is scattered to soak up the worst of it. Straw is laid down in front of nicer homes, but it's never enough. The filth accumulates. It doesn't smell bad all at once. It sneaks up on you. It thickens in the corners of your awareness, until one day you realize you haven't taken a full breath in weeks. And that's not the worst of it, because human waste isn't the only thing dumped. Slaughterhouse runoff, tannery, waste piss, dung, lime, and flesh, the leavings of fishmongers, the spoiled contents of carts, dead cats, dead dogs, sometimes more. Rivers run brown, then black, wells sour, flies multiply, rats rejoice, and through it all, people live. They clean their homes, even as the streets rot. They sprinkle herbs on their thresholds. They sweep, they perfume themselves. They keep up appearances, because dignity is the only defense left, and children play. They splash in puddles. They chase each other down alleys. They climb things that should not be climbed. They laugh because they don't know, because no one tells them, because no one knows what else to do. And when the sickness comes, when people start dying, again no one blames the waste. They blame sin. They blame stars. They blame foreigners, witches, God. Never the chamber pot. Never the street. Never themselves. That's the miracle and the tragedy of the medieval city. It learns to live with what should be unlivable. It teaches people to endure the unbearable. And you, dear listener, would not last a week. Not because of what you couldn't eat, but because of what you couldn't ignore. Let's rest here a moment. We'll walk into the world of work next. What people do all day, just to stay in motion, just to stay alive. Work in a medieval city is not a choice. It is not a calling. It is not self-actualization. It is quite simply survival with a name tag. You work or you beg. You work or you steal. You work or you starve. And if you're lucky, your work only hurts a little. Let's begin where most people do, with your hands. Your fingers define you. If you are born to a blacksmith, they learn the rhythm of hammer and tongue before they learn prayer. If your mother sold bread, your hands become strong from kneading, fast from wrapping, calloused from flame. If you are a washerwoman, your nails blacken, your wrists swell, your back aches before your 20s begin. And if you are a child, you start early. Always. There are no toys, no school unless you are rich, and even then, and only if you're male. Children haul buckets, watch siblings, peel vegetables, chase rats, deliver parcels. They don't complain. No one would listen if they did, because complaint implies there's a better option. There isn't. The city's economy is a brutal ecosystem. Every role is filled because someone is desperate enough to do it. Someone is always more desperate than you. Tanners soak skins in vats of urine and lime. Their clothes never stop stinking. Their hands peel from chemical burns. They are often shunned, even as people rely on the leather they produce. Fullers walk barefoot through tubs of wool and ammonia, which is to say, stale urine. They tread until their skin breaks, until their legs numb, until the cloth is soft enough to be sold. Executioners are paid to kill. They are feared. They are essential. They live on the edge of the city, and no one invites them to dinner. Midwives see more death than priests. They pray as they work, not for success, but for mercy. And then there are the invisible jobs, the rakers, the night soil men, the bone pickers, the ones who go through ash and muck and midden for things that might still be useful. A bent nail, a broken comb, a crust of bread with less mold than the rest. These people are not named in history books, but they are the ones who hold the city up by its ankles and shake loose the last of its wealth. And for what? Wages that buy stale food, that pay rent on a room where 3 people sleep beside a dying fire, that disappear the moment your child coughs, or your cart breaks, or your shoes fail. There is no margin, no buffer, no mercy, and yet they sing in workshops, at wells, in the fields outside the walls they hum, they chant, they make noise that sounds like hope, because even work, back-breaking and soul-thinning as it is, becomes bearable if it has rhythm, and work is everywhere. It begins at sunrise and ends only when the body demands sleep, or when it fails, or when someone takes your place. You would not last a week, because work here doesn't just use you, it owns you. And if you stop, even for a moment, the city does not pause to ask why. It simply steps over you. Let's keep walking. There's one more thing the city makes people do. One more thing you wouldn't survive. It makes them believe in something, anything. Faith is next. Faith is not optional in a medieval city. It is not an accessory, not a choice. It is the air people pretend is clean. It is the architecture of thought, the background hum of every conversation, the explanation for all suffering, and the excuse for most of it. You cannot escape it, even if you try. The city is built in the shadow of the church, literally. Towers and spires loom over the market stalls, the workshops, the plague pits. Bells toll not just for the hour, but for your soul. Morning, noon, and evening the Angelus calls you to stop what you are doing, bow your head, and remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return. Inside the churches, stone and gold, candles flicker. The scent of wax and wood and old prayers hangs heavy. There are relics, bones, teeth, slivers of saints, robes locked in boxes behind thick glass. They are supposed to protect you. Sometimes they do. Outside the churches, fear. You pay tithes, you attend mass, you confess, you obey. You recite words you barely understand because not knowing them is dangerous. Illiteracy is not a sin, but heresy is. And sometimes they look the same. You do not question the priest, even when he drinks too much, even when his hands stray, even when he is less holy than you, because he speaks for God, and you don't. You wear tokens, wooden crosses, strings of beads, charms engraved with verses. You keep holy water by the door. You scratch prayers into the dust of your threshold when your child is ill. You ask Saint Anthony to find what is lost, Saint Apollonia to dull your toothache, Saint Dymphna to guard your mind. And you believe, because not believing is terrifying. If bad things happen because of God's will, at least there's a reason. If they happen for no reason at all, the world becomes unbearable. So you bend your knees, you fold your hands, you pray for rain, or sun, or mercy. You fast when told. You flagellate yourself in times of plague. You march in processions. You carry candles until the wax scars your skin. You believe that suffering earns you grace, but quietly, secretly, you also hedge your bets. You visit the cunning woman on the edge of town, the one who brews teas from plants that smell like salvation, the one who burns things and whispers things and claims nothing, promises less, but still people come, because she heals in ways the priest cannot. And when someone dies, you leave coins on their eyes, even if the church says it's pagan. You say the right words. You close the door slowly. You light a candle, just in case. Faith in this city is not peace. It is pressure. It is ritual, repetition, desperation dressed as devotion, and yet it is also comfort. Not because it explains, but because it speaks to the lonely, to the sick, to the ones who clean blood from stones and wonder if it's worth it. You wouldn't last a week here, not because you'd stop believing, but because you'd start. Because belief is contagious in a place where survival feels miraculous, and once it takes root, it doesn't let go, even after you leave, even after you die. Let's leave the churches behind now. Let's step into the places even faith avoids, where stories get quiet, and the dead don't stay where you left them. Death in a medieval city is not sacred, not clean, not private. It is constant, it is ordinary, it is everywhere. You see it before you learn to spell your name. You smell it before you understand what that smell means. You hear it in lullabies, in prayers, in footsteps too quiet to belong to the living. And still, you hope it will not come for you. Let's begin with the body. When someone dies, time begins ticking. You cannot wait. There are no embalmers, no quiet refrigeration, no sterile rooms. The body starts to change within hours, softening, leaking, sighing as if not quite done. The cheeks sink, the fingers stiffen, the belly swells, the flies come. If you are lucky, there is a church nearby. If you are very lucky, you had money put aside for a grave. The church owns the ground. Consecrated soil is holy, finite, expensive. The rich buy their way in, with marble, with prayers, with bribes. The poor are buried in layers, one atop the other. Over and over, you are not alone in the earth. Sometimes the bones are moved, quietly, unceremoniously, to make room for the new. You walk past walls built with skulls. You drink from wells dug in old cemeteries. You sleep above someone else's end. And if there is no place for the body, then the plague pits open, wide, deep, reeking, dug by men who have already seen too much. Crosses are planted, sometimes, but names are not remembered. The dead lose their identities long before the worms arrive, and yet death is not invisible. It is not hidden behind curtains. It walks with you. It speaks through proverbs. It grins from paintings. Memento mori, they whisper. Remember, you must die. Ars moriendi, the art of dying well. But who gets that art? The rich, the prepared, the ones with family. The rest die where they fall. In alleys, on benches, behind taverns, in tenements too cramped for grief. The city cannot stop to mourn them all. So it doesn't. It swallows. It makes room. And somehow, life continues. Bread still bakes. Children still play. The bells still toll. But the dead don't always stay quiet. Their stories linger. Their names slip into curses. Their footsteps are heard on stairs where no one climbs. Their faces appear in dreams, asking why, or asking nothing at all. You wouldn't last a week. Not because you'd die, but because they would know you don't belong. Because in a city like this, the dead recognize the living, and they remember who listens. Let's walk a little deeper, into morning, into memory, into the places the living never leave for long. Grief in a medieval city does not wear black. It wears time, because you cannot afford a funeral when the bread is already too dry and the rent is already too high. You cannot mourn when the baby is crying, when the water must be fetched, when the body is still warm beside the hearth and no one wants to be the one to touch it first. So you measure your sorrow in hours. 1 hour to wash the body if there is water. 1 hour to find the priest if he is sober, or kind, or still alive. 1 hour to dig or bribe, or beg, or lie. 1 hour before the smell becomes unbearable. 1 hour before the grief hardens into silence. There are rituals, yes, but they are fragmented. A candle, if you can spare the wax. A handful of herbs. A scrap of linen tied around the wrists to keep them from moving. You whisper psalms, not because you believe they work, but because they are the only words that do not hurt to say. And sometimes, you don't do any of it. You wrap the body. You carry it out. You leave it near the chapel gate with a coin and a note, or nothing at all, and you walk away. Because mourning here is dangerous. It slows you down. It softens you. It calls attention. People avoid the grieving like they avoid illness. They speak in platitudes. God's will, he suffers no more. She's in a better place because they are afraid if they say what they really feel, they won't be able to stop. But the grief still lives in the body. It knots the stomach. It closes the throat. It makes the hands shake when they shouldn't. It curls behind the eyes and pretends to be fatigue. It finds places in the bones to sleep, and it wakes up often. You cry alone, quietly, at the well, in the woods, in corners of the chapel that don't echo. You talk to the dead in places no one else will hear. You sleep in their clothes. You wear their shoes. You dream of them, but only the parts you wish you could forget. Because remembering hurts, but forgetting, that's worse. There are grave markers, sometimes wooden crosses, stones with no names, chalk drawings that fade with the next rain, flowers if it's spring, bones if it isn't. And there are songs, low, broken songs, passed from mothers to daughters, from widows to strangers, from mourners to the night. They do not rhyme. They do not always end. They just continue, like grief, like breath. Like this city, you wouldn't last a week, because you'd want someone to notice your sorrow. And here, no one can afford to. Here, sorrow is not a wound. It's a weather. It settles. It passes. It returns. Just like the dead. Let's walk further still. There's something in the silence. Something that speaks without words. The dead don't leave much. Not in the way we imagine. No wills. No vaults of family heirlooms. No final letters tucked into drawers. Death in a medieval city is too fast, too frequent, too impersonal for ceremony. The dead leave behind objects, yes, but not always memories. Sometimes only weight, clothes, mostly. A wool tunic with elbows rubbed thin. A cloak that still smells of its owner. Shoes too worn to repair, too precious to throw away. They are not buried with these things. The living take them. They must. A child wears her father's coat with sleeves that drag through the muck. A widow turns her husband's belt into a new strap for her satchel. Nothing is wasted, not grief, not fabric. Sometimes there are tools. A baker's paddle, charred at the edge. A mason's mallet, the handle smoothed by years of grip. A spindle still holding a final thread. These are passed down, or sold, or stolen. Work continues, the city insists. And sometimes, rarely, there are words, scratched onto vellum, hidden under floorboards, tucked into psalters, or bound in cord. Not poetry, not legacy, just thoughts, just lists, just fragments. Tell her I did my best. The pain began in my chest. Do not let them bury me face down. No one reads these aloud, not in public, but they pass from hand to hand like contraband. A man pays for bread with a note instead of coin. A woman leaves a scrap of writing in a wall crack because she believes someone, someday, might understand. Because the dead do not vanish cleanly. They leave impressions. A chair no one will sit in. A song no one finishes. A patch of earth that feels colder than the rest. They leave rumors. She spoke to angels. He cursed the priest. They died too fast. They died too slow. They leave guilt. You should have gone to her. You should have stayed with him. You should have said the thing you never said. But the city does not pause for grief. So you carry what you can. You tie a dead man's cord around your waist. You wear his hat. You try not to think about the lice. You tell yourself it's not strange, that it's just cloth, that it's just survival. But it isn't. The dead leave more than things. They leave expectations that you will live better or longer, or at least differently. And when you don't, their silence grows heavier. You wouldn't last a week, because eventually you'd start listening to that silence, and you'd hear something in it. Not words, just waiting. The city does not mourn, it remembers. We'll sit with that next. With the stories that weren't meant to last, but do, somehow. History is dishonest. It remembers what is loud, what is written, what is carved in stone. It remembers kings and popes and warriors with clean armor. It forgets the woman who fed 5 children with nothing but water and bread crusts. It forgets the boy who died nameless in an alley because no one ever taught him how to pray. But the city remembers, not with books, with impressions, with habits, with stories that aren't quite stories anymore. They float, mostly, between door frames, between generations, between the teeth of women who mutter when they sweep. They begin like this. There was once a girl who heard voices in the well. Or, they say, if you walk past that wall at dawn, you'll smell lavender, though nothing grows there. Or, don't go to that house. It remembers. These aren't ghost stories. Not exactly. They're more like memories that outlived their owners. Sentences that refused to die. Whispers with nowhere else to go. They survive because someone kept repeating them. And they change, of course. A girl becomes a man. A fire becomes a flood. The well becomes a stairwell. But the shape stays the same. The grief, the fear, the unspoken question behind every retelling. What if it's true? The city is full of these stories. Of the baker who slept through the fire. Of the priest who buried his sins in the floorboards. Of the midwife who took a name that was not hers and lived longer because of it. No one writes them down. They don't need to. They are spoken every day. In the market, in the bathhouse, in the line for bread. Not because people believe them, but because they want to. Because if the story survives, maybe the person did too. Maybe a name means something. Maybe memory is stronger than stone. You wouldn't last a week here, because you'd want answers. You'd want to ask who that woman was. You'd want to know if the well really spoke. You'd want to fix what cannot be fixed. But this city does not trade in answers. It trades in echoes. And sometimes, that's enough. Let's follow one of those echoes next, down a forgotten street, into a place no one speaks of directly. The city has secrets still. There's a street in every medieval city that doesn't appear on maps. It might have had a name once, but no one says it now. If they do, they say it wrong, on purpose, like spitting into a storm. Because names have power here, and this one has too much. You find it by accident. You turn left when you meant to go right. You follow a cart you thought was familiar. You chase a child's laughter and realize too late that no child is there. And suddenly, you're standing at the mouth of a narrow lane that seems wrong. The air feels different, cooler still. The smell is not of rot, or piss, or burning tallow, but something else. Something sweet, almost, like dried flowers. Like earth after too much rain. The buildings lean harder here. Their windows have been boarded up for so long the wood has grown into the frame. No signs hang. No door is fully open. And yet, the street is not empty. It watches. It breathes. People don't live here anymore, not officially. But the city never leaves a space unclaimed. There are things in the shadows, not monsters, just remnants. Shapes that don't move quite right. Whispers that come from too low to belong to mouths. Scratches on the inside of doors. Smudges on the walls that look like handprints too small, too many, too high. And yet, you're not afraid. Not in the way you should be. Because this street doesn't threaten you. It remembers you. It remembers everyone. The plague, dead, the burned, the accused, the abandoned, the ones the rest of the city forgot to mourn. They did not disappear. They gathered, here, quietly. Not ghosts, not exactly, just memory given shape. You see a candle burning behind a shutter, but there's no flame. You hear a lullaby hummed in a language you don't recognize, but it feels familiar. You step on something soft, and when you look down, there's nothing there. This is not a place of fear. It's a place of accumulation. The weight of centuries pressing inward. The grief no one buried. The voices no one recorded. They didn't vanish. They waited. And now, they're watching you because you're new. Because you don't know how to pretend. Because you walked in without asking. And for a moment, you understand. This city does not forget. It forgives, sometimes. It buries. It erases. But it does not forget. And in the quiet heart of its most haunted street, the dead do not rest. They remember. They listen. You wouldn't last a week. Not because you'd flee, but because you'd stay and listen too long. Let's step back now. There's more city to see, more rot to wade through, more beauty, too. Unexpected, sharp, sad, and maybe if you're lucky something like hope. You wouldn't expect it, not here. Not in this city that reeks of death and drinks filth like water. Not in streets slick with waste, or rooms too crowded to breathe. But beauty insists on being seen, even in a place like this. Especially in a place like this. It's in the colors first. Bright, stubborn, defiant. Not clean. Nothing is clean but vibrant. Clothes dyed with whatever could be found. Madder root for red, woad for blue, weld for yellow. None of them consistent. None of them easy, and none of them dull. A child wears a tunic the color of crushed sunset. A woman carries onions in a shawl dyed deep as bruises. A man's boots are patched with scraps of green so bright they look wet. There is no uniformity, no fashion, just fragments of pigment that say, I am here. Even the poorest find ways to shine. They rub chalk into their cheeks. They braid their hair with string. They paint their homes with flour paste and charcoal when they can't afford paint. Not because it lasts, but because they do. And it's not just the people. The buildings, though crumbling, are decorated. Carved beasts hang from gutters. Angels peek from under eaves. Window shutters are painted with stars, flowers, strange symbols. Doors are etched with initials, dates, superstitions. A dead man's name scratched into stone, a birth recorded beside it. Nothing is pristine, but everything has been touched by intention. Even the churches, grim as they are, full of echo and incense and old air, they glow. Candles flicker across golden icons. Stained glass bends sunlight into fractured rainbows. The saints on the walls are chipped, weary, covered in soot, but still watching, still present, still loved. And above it all, the sky. You forget, sometimes, that the sky still exists here, that it can be blue, that clouds still drift and change and glow pink in the evening. People stop to watch them, just for a moment, just long enough to remind themselves that not everything in this world is rotting. Children draw shapes in the mud. Lovers carve initials into beams. Women hum to themselves while combing lice from a sister's hair. A boy sketches a cat in the dust with the bone of a chicken, and when someone steps on it, he just draws it again. This is beauty here, not perfect, not preserved, not sacred, insistent, like weeds in stone, like laughter in mourning, like song in a language no one writes down. You wouldn't last a week, not because of what you'd suffer, but because of what you'd feel, because beauty here isn't an escape, it's a confrontation. It looks you in the face and says, even this is worth saving. Even now, even here, let's follow it. There's more to see, more ugliness, more grace, and the strange ways they share the same space. Sound, once again, but this time, not the market's chaos, not the bells tolling their grim arithmetic, not the rats in the gutter or the shouts from windows. This is different. This is music. Yes, even here, even in the rot. It begins with footsteps, with rhythm. A cartwheel's uneven clatter becomes a beat. A woman's humming, too tired to be deliberate, floats out a window and latches onto it. A child's laugh breaks the line and loops back. The city is always making sound, but sometimes, rarely, it becomes music. Someone plucks a lute with fingers blackened from dyeing cloth. The strings are out of tune. He plays anyway. Someone else sings a verse from a song their mother sang, and their mother before her. The words are nonsense now. Half Latin, half local, all memory, and people listen, just for a moment. Even the ones who pretend not to. There are traveling minstrels, too. Thin men with tired eyes and packs full of mismatched instruments. They play for food, for coin, for shelter. They tell stories that rhyme, but only barely, about queens who weep blood, about heroes with broken swords, about animals that speak, about saints who lie. The songs are not pretty, but they are true. And in the taverns, those warm, sour rooms crammed with bodies and spilled ale, people sing differently, louder, angrier. They slap the tables, they howl, they throw their voices at the ceiling like curses. But even this is music. Because in a place that doesn't allow you to scream during the day, a song is the next best thing. Sometimes the music is accidental, the wind howling through broken shutters, The drip of water from a cracked roof into a rusted pan. A lullaby sung to a baby who won't sleep, layered over the creak of floorboards and the shift of straw in a nearby loft. Sometimes it is sacred. Gregorian chant echoing through cold stone. Nuns harmonizing without smiles. A boy soprano hitting a note so high it silences the coughs of the dying below. You don't know what the words mean. You don't need to. The sound alone forgives you. And other times, it is neither sacred nor accidental. It is defiant. A flute played beneath a noose. A song hummed by a woman as her child is taken away. A tune scratched into a wall with a nail because no one would listen while she was alive. This is not entertainment. This is resistance. You wouldn't last a week, not because the silence would kill you, but because the music would remind you what silence costs. Because even here, even now, someone is still singing. Let's stay quiet for a moment. There's more the city wants to show us. Not its beauty, but its mercy. Mercy in a medieval city is not grand. It is not bestowed from balconies. It does not come from the hand of a king or the mouth of a priest. It isn't gilded in gold or carved into stone. It is small, almost invisible. It happens in the places no one looks. A woman wraps bread in a cloth and leaves it at a doorstep she's never knocked on. She says nothing. She walks away. The recipient will never know who gave it. That is the point. A man with a twisted foot teaches a child how to lace his boots so they don't blister. The child says thank you. The man shrugs, pretends it doesn't matter. It does. A widow cuts a piece of her only good shawl to wrap around a dog with a bleeding paw. A baker burns 3 loaves, gives them to the family down the street without asking for coin. Too tough to sell, he says. He lies. Mercy is not pity. It is not charity. It is risk. Because in this city, kindness can cost you. Give too much, and your own children go hungry. Show weakness, and someone stronger may notice. Offer help, and you might be mistaken for a heretic, or a witch, or simply different. And yet, it happens, over and over again, in courtyards, in corners, in whispers. A midwife stays too long with a woman who cannot pay. A boy shares his soup with someone who kicked him yesterday. An old man prays not for his own soul, but for the soul of someone who wronged him 20 years ago. And there are saints, quiet ones, not canonized, not painted, not sung about. The girl who brings water to the plague house. The man who digs graves for people no one claims. The orphan who teaches another orphan to read. The stranger who lights a candle for the soul of someone whose name he does not know. You want mercy to be beautiful, clean, heroic. But here it is dirty, imperfect, unglamorous. It does not always feel good, but it always costs something. That's how you know it's real. You wouldn't last a week, not because you couldn't be kind, but because you'd want credit for it. And here, mercy is only mercy when no one is watching. Let's linger here a little longer. There's one more piece of beauty the city wants to give you. One you won't be ready for. One that might just undo you. Love exists here. Not the kind that's sung in courts or written into legends. Not the kind that ends in marriage or begins with flowers or fits neatly into anyone's idea of a proper story. This love lives in corners, in silence. It survives in glances, in calloused hands brushing for just a second too long, in letters that never get sent, in promises whispered beside someone's last breath. You do not declare love in a medieval city. You show it, quietly, repeatedly, without asking for anything in return. A wife holds her husband's hand while he coughs blood into a cloth. She pretends not to notice the red. He pretends he'll get better. They both know he won't, but they keep holding hands anyway. A man carves a small flower into the handle of a broom. His partner notices, says nothing, smiles when sweeping. Two women walk to the well together each morning. Though they live on opposite sides of the square, they don't talk about it. They just meet, every day, rain or shine, until one of them doesn't. A girl hides a wooden token beneath her pillow, given by someone who no longer walks this world. She dreams of them, not often, but always the same dream. A road, a hand, a voice that says her name. Sometimes love is simply noticing, bringing a warm stone to someone with aching joints, fixing the strap on someone's shoe without being asked, sitting beside someone, not speaking, while they cry into their sleeves. And sometimes, love is letting go, carrying a body to a place where the crows won't reach it, washing the hair of someone who no longer breathes, lighting a candle for someone who will never thank you. There are no love poems here, no red roses, just breadcrumbs in the street left by a brother for a sister who forgets to eat. Just a bit of honey saved by a mother whose hands shake when she spoons it out. Just a smile offered by someone whose teeth are mostly gone. That is love, ungraced, unspoken, uncompensated, and it happens every day. You wouldn't last a week, not because you wouldn't find love, but because you'd never believe it could look like this. And once you did, you'd never forget it. Let's move now to something stranger, something harder. Not beauty, but meaning. You've seen the rot. You've smelled it, stepped in it, swallowed it. You've walked the alleys where the dead whisper, where the rats pray, where children laugh with mouths too empty. You've heard the bells, the coughing, the hush of mourning that never fully leaves a room. And still, somehow, you're here. Still walking, still wondering what it all means. Because that's what people do, isn't it? We look for patterns in filth. We find purpose in places no purpose should survive. We see a woman lighting a candle and think, she must believe. We see a man rebuilding the same roof for the third time and think, he must care. We see children playing beside a plague cart and think, maybe there is still joy. Meaning is not something the city gives you, it's something you bring with you. And slowly, it changes. At first, you think meaning must come from survival, from making it through the day. But everyone is surviving, and no one is okay. So that can't be it. Then you think, maybe meaning comes from faith, from the church, the relics, the chants. But the priests are tired, the saints are missing, and God feels far away in the cold. So you search somewhere smaller. You see a woman picking herbs from a cracked wall. You see a boy singing to his dog. You see a man weaving baskets with one eye and no fingers on his left hand. And suddenly, you understand, meaning here is not grand, it is not written, it is woven into habits, into ritual, into the ordinary. You sweep your threshold each morning, not because it stays clean, but because that act makes the day start. You whisper a name before sleep, not because they'll hear it, but because you need to remember it. You patched your shirt with mismatched thread, not because you care what it looks like, but because that thread is from your sister's shawl and she is gone. Everything means something, because nothing is guaranteed, and meaning, in the end, is not truth. It is tenderness. It is the soft defiance of people who know their world is falling apart and choose to live in it anyway. You wouldn't last a week, because you'd look for answers. And here, there are only gestures. A shared crust of bread, a lullaby hummed into the wind. A prayer no one believes but still repeats. This is not a life anyone would choose, but it is a life, and that, in itself, is sacred. We'll leave the beauty here. Step into the final streets, where the city looks you in the eye and dares you to keep walking. You thought you could pass through unnoticed. A shadow among shadows, a visitor, a voyeur. Someone drifting along the alleys of the past, collecting scraps of curiosity without being changed by them. But the city sees you. It saw you the moment you arrived. It saw how you hesitated at the bloodstain that wouldn't wash out of the cobblestone. How you lingered too long beside the child's grave with no name. How you flinched when the woman kissed her fevered husband on the lips, full of hope and death in equal measure. It sees how often you look up expecting something different, expecting grace or comfort or architecture that doesn't sag beneath the weight of memory. And still you keep walking, and the city begins to take you seriously. It tests you, slips its fingers into your thoughts, gives you 1 hour of stillness, only to follow it with 5 of dread, offers you a kindness, then watches what you do with it. Because this city isn't a place, it's a mirror, and mirrors are cruel. Here, your modern comforts mean nothing. Your softness is not a virtue. Your sadness is not unique. Everyone is sad. Everyone is hungry. Everyone is dying, and not quietly. And yet, there's something else. The city sees not just your fragility, but your longing. It knows why you came. Not for knowledge, not for horror, but for company, because you are tired. Because your own world has grown too fast, too clean, too loud. Because your grief is invisible there. Because your joy feels suspect. Because you, like this city, have survived things no one applauds you for. And, in a way, you belong here more than you thought. Not because you were strong enough, but because you were broken enough. The city welcomes the broken. It understands them. It reshapes them, and in the end, it keeps them. Not with chains, not with threats, but with memory. You wouldn't last a week. Maybe, but maybe you already have. Maybe you've been here longer than you think. Maybe the city isn't behind you, it's beside you. It always was. Let's keep walking, we're close now, to something quieter and final. You reach a part of the city where even the moon won't look. It's not marked on any map. It doesn't carry a name, not even a forgotten one. It's not cursed. It's not sacred. It's just overlooked. The buildings here lean harder, not just because they're old, but because they're tired. Like they're listening, like they're waiting. The street is narrow. The air doesn't move. There is no breeze, no ash, no birdsong, only breath, yours. It fogs in front of you, warm and real and fragile. You're not sure why you came this way. There's nothing to see. No shops, no wells, no lights behind the windows. Just a long, low silence that feels less like absence and more like anticipation. And yet you keep walking. Because something about this space feels familiar. Not in the way a place should lay out, scent, scale, but in the way grief feels when you finally name it. In the way you once sat in a hallway too long after visiting someone who would not live through the night. In the way time bends around pain. This is not a street. It's a feeling. It's what the city thinks when no one is watching. You pass a door with no handle, a bench with no legs, a window that shows a reflection but no room behind it, and still you are not afraid, because this, at last, is the place without performance. The city no longer needs to test you, no longer needs to show you its ghosts, or its rot, or its mercy. You've seen them. You've seen them. You've heard them. You've remembered what you didn't mean to carry, and the city trusts you now. Enough to show you its final truth, that underneath the history, beneath the horror, beneath the dirt and the blood and the impossible beauty, there is still something like hope. Not the kind with trumpets, not the kind with sunlight, not the kind with speeches and survival odds and cheerful endings. Just the hope that someone will remember this place, this pain, this persistence, that someone will walk these streets even in imagination and say, I see you, not I understand, not I approve, just I see you. That's all the city ever wanted, to be seen, to be known, to be forgiven for the things it had to do to survive. You wouldn't last a week. Maybe, but maybe that's the point. No one does. They last a day, and then another, until suddenly they are the city, and the city is them. We'll stop here, for now. There's only one more place to go, the quietest one. This is the place beyond endings, where no bells ring, where no footsteps echo, where even memory softens its edges out of respect. It is not a graveyard, though you've passed many. It is not a church, though prayers were spoken here. It is not a room, or a ruin, or a map point. It is the space left behind when everything else has gone. Here, the city exhales, not in sadness, not in defeat, in relief, because it has shown you everything it can, because it has nothing left to hide, because it has remembered you, even if you forget it. There's no plaque here, no statue, no saint, just a low stone, smoothed by weather, not inscription. Someone once sat here, long ago, and wept, or prayed, or simply rested, and for a moment, the stone remembers. It holds warmth longer than it should. It hums faintly. It forgives you for not understanding more. You sit, because standing feels wrong now, because the journey is not something to walk away from, because silence deserves an audience, too. Here, the ghosts do not speak. They don't need to. They've said everything already in the creak of a shutter, the smear of soot on a child's cheek, the note left under a bowl of rotten fruit. They've told their story, and now you are part of it, not because you earned it, not because you survived, but because you listened. That is enough. That is always enough. The city is quiet now, not empty, not gone, just at rest. You rise, slowly. You turn back the way you came. The street is still narrow. The walls still close. But something is different. You know the way now. Not just the route, the rhythm. And when you step back into the noise, into the filth, into the bright and broken beauty of the living world, you carry the silence with you, like a blessing, like a burden, like a truth that only reveals itself in darkness. You wouldn't last a week. You did, and the city thanks you for it. You leave the city, but it doesn't leave you. It clings not in fear, but in recognition, like dirt in your fingernails, like a song you didn't know you knew, like the smell of smoke that lives in your clothes long after the fire is gone. What you carry isn't obvious. It's not the image of the rats, or the dripping chamber pots, or the blistered hands of the tanner. It's not the corpses, or the hunger, or even the echoes of prayer. It's subtler than that. It's the pause you now take before turning on a faucet, wondering how it feels to draw water by hand. It's the guilt that surfaces, quiet and uninvited, when you toss out food that might have fed someone for 3 days. It's the ache that rises in your chest when you hear someone cough on a train, and for a second you imagine the fear of sickness spreading house by house. It's the loneliness, the specific, quiet kind. The kind that recognizes itself in others. The kind that nods across centuries, saying, yes, I know, and it's the joy, too. Fierce, small, unapologetic. The joy of clean sheets, of warm hands, of someone singing badly in the next room. The city gives you that, if nothing else, a recalibration of wonder. You see a weed pushing through concrete, and instead of pulling it, you say, live, then. You see an old woman feeding pigeons, and you don't turn away. You see your reflection, tired and flawed, and real, and you don't look down. This isn't nostalgia, it's witness. You saw how people lived, and died, and still found ways to paint their walls, and sing to strangers, and love without reason. And now you carry that, like a second skin, like a memory that didn't come from your own life, but shaped you anyway. You wouldn't last a week, you already did, and now there's no going back. Let's walk a little further, not through the city, through yourself. It doesn't look like stone. It doesn't smell like ash, or sweat, or the metallic temps of blood in a pail, but you've started building it, quietly, without tools, without meaning to. Inside you now, there's a street that turns into shadow too soon. There's a window that never quite closes, a bench no one claims, a church where no one sings anymore, but the echo still waits. These aren't memories, not yours anyway. They're inheritances. You didn't ask for them. They were offered and you accepted. Because some truths don't belong to a time. They belong to the people who need them. So here you are with a city tucked under your ribs. A crooked place. An impossible place. But alive. You visit it when the world becomes too bright. When you are asked to smile without reason. When you are praised for surviving a life that's been quietly breaking you for years. You go back to that imagined alley where mercy lived in shared crusts. You walk those streets again when you need to remember that grief is not weakness. That love doesn't always look like poems. That beauty can come from rot, and meaning from repetition, and dignity from a face smeared with soot. The city becomes your second heartbeat, and some nights, when everything is quiet, you can almost hear its bells again, faint, out of time, welcoming you home. You wouldn't last a week. No one does. But no one forgets it either. That's the trick, you leave. But part of you stays, sweeping, singing, holding hands with ghosts who asked for nothing and gave you everything. Let's linger just a little longer. There's still something left, not to learn, but to feel. No one teaches you how to live in a world that doesn't care if you do. No one teaches you how to mourn a stranger, how to carry a kindness that has no witness, how to keep walking when your knees ache and the sky forgets your name. But the city did, not by instruction, by example. It showed you how to endure with dignity, how to love without audience, how to grieve without performance, and slowly, gently, terribly, taught you how to hope without asking for reward. You learned to find the sacred in the mundane, a clean cup, a closed door, a loaf that rose. You learned that silence doesn't mean absence, that pain doesn't mean punishment, that mercy can look like a shared blanket, or a look that says, I see you, and I am still here. You learned that time is not measured in clocks, but in the distance between suffering and song. And you learned that even the forgotten, especially the forgotten, make the world go on. So what do you do now, carrying all this? You move slower, you look longer, you ask quieter questions. Not what do I want, but who do I owe? Not what's next, but what still hurts. Not how do I win, but how do I stay human? You wouldn't last a week. You did, and what you took with you is not just memory, it is practice. The practice of being human in a world that tries every day to convince you not to be. And now, you're part of the story, the same story. The long, dark, crooked story told by cities that rot and rise and rot again, told by hands that keep working, told by voices that keep singing, told by hearts that keep breaking and beating anyway. Let's finish soon. We're almost at the end. And then, maybe, you can rest. You weren't supposed to belong here. Not really. You arrive like a tourist, curious, distant, insulated by centuries. You thought you were visiting the past. You thought you could leave it behind. But belonging doesn't ask for permission. It happens when you're not looking. In the moment you stopped flinching at the filth. In the moment you saw a broken cart and thought, that could still be fixed. In the moment you cried not because of the cruelty, but because someone offered a crust of bread to someone hungrier. You didn't just watch, you felt, and that changes everything. Now, you see the city not as horror, but as a kind of mirror. It reflects your own exhaustion, your compromises, your scraped together kindness. It shows you what it means to live without certainty and still choose grace. This city, with all its rot and noise and shadows, it welcomed you. Not because you were brave, but because you were honest. You carried your own grief like currency. You brought your loneliness, and it nodded back. You whispered your questions into its dark streets, and it whispered some back. And now, somehow, you belong. Not in the official records, not in the annals, not in the statues carved by men who never touched dirt. You belong in the forgotten places, in the corner where a girl once carved her name with a nail, in the cellar where a midwife kept one pair of clean hands, in the stairwell where a boy once wept and decided not to steal. You belong in the hum, the low, relentless, human murmur of people who hurt and help and endure. And this belonging, it is not loud. It's not triumphant. It doesn't offer you pride, only place. And sometimes that's more than enough. You wouldn't last a week, no, but you lasted a story and stories. They're what cities are made of. Let's finish now, not with a lesson, not with a bow, just with a breath. Here, at the end, there are no fireworks, no final twist, no revelation that ties it all together, only stillness. You've walked through plague and poverty, through alleyways slick with despair, through chapels where saints are missing and songs forget their tune. You've seen what beauty does when no one's looking. You've felt what kindness costs. You've looked into the eyes of a city that never wanted to be remembered and remembered it anyway. And now you breathe. Not because the air is clean, not because the pain is gone, not because everything is better, but because you can. That's what the city gave you in the end. Not history, not horror, but permission to breathe, to mourn slowly, to love badly, to keep going, even when you're not sure why. It does not matter that you wouldn't have lasted a week, because you did last this night, and that is everything. So thank you for walking with me, for listening, for staying. It's late, I know, but I'm glad you're here. Let's end the way the city does, with no trumpet, no closing door, no promise, just a quiet truth left behind. The past is not gone. It's just waiting to be seen. There are cities you visit once and forget, and there are cities that never leave you. This one, this grotesque, gasping, beautiful ruiners, the latter, it's the kind of place that threads itself into your language, into the way you pause before speaking, into how you listen when someone says they're tired, but don't say why. You begin to notice what's missing in the world around you. The silence that's too clean. The buildings that feel empty despite their gloss. The way grief is hidden, love is purchased, and kindness is reserved for moments when someone is watching. The medieval city didn't hide these things. It couldn't afford to. And now, neither can you, because part of you knows too much. You've learned how life was lived when no one expected it to last. How people stitched hope into rags and called it enough. How mourning walked beside laughter like an old friend. You carry that with you now, not in nostalgia, not in pity, but in recognition. There is a tenderness that comes from knowing how bad it can get tanned, still choosing to be gentle. There is a power in remembering the forgotten, not to rescue them, but to join them, to say, you mattered, you still do. And maybe, somewhere, someone will say the same of you. That's the secret, really. Why we look back, why we tell stories, not to escape the present, but to give it context, to give it company, to remind ourselves that we are never truly alone, even in the darkest streets, even in the hour before dawn, even now, we're nearly done. But the city never ends, it just quiets. Let's walk the last stretch together. The city is behind you now. At least, that's what the road wants you to believe. But you can still feel it, in your souls, in your spine, in that part of your chest that aches when the world is too loud. It's not a weight, not quite, more like a presence. A slow, familiar rhythm like walking beside someone you love, even if they don't speak. This road you're on doesn't lead back to your world, it leads through it. The city comes with you, in how you touch things, how you wait before answering, how you notice the grief others carry in the way they set down their cup, or adjust their coat, or pause mid-sentence before saying, I'm fine. You don't say much anymore, not about the city. It's not the kind of thing you bring up at dinner. Not something you explain in 10 seconds or less. Not something that fits into headlines or hashtags, but it shows up anyway. In the questions you ask, in the silences you allow, in the moments you give others the grace to fall apart without fixing them, because you know what it's like to be broken in a place that keeps moving. You know what it's like to bury something too quietly. You know what it means to sing, even when no one listens. You've seen it, and you can't unsee it. You wouldn't last a week. No, but you'll last a life. And that, in the end, is harder, more beautiful, more terrifying, more real. We'll rest soon, but first, one more turn, one more moment. All stories end the same way, not with resolution, not with clarity, but with quiet. A space where the words stop, but the feeling doesn't. That's where we are now. The part where the city no longer speaks, because it doesn't need to, because you've learned its language. Not Latin, not French, not Middle English, but grief, kindness, echo. You remember the girl who washed the feet of the dead, the boy who carried water to a plague house without a second thought, the old woman who left her last piece of bread on a neighbor's step, not because they were saints, but because they were human. And now you know what that really means. Not perfection, not glory, just showing up, just holding on, just trying. You don't need to live in a medieval city to understand this. You already do. The names have changed, the buildings are taller, the air is cleaner sometimes, but the ache is the same. The reaching, the resilience, the fragile, furious joy of being alive when you shouldn't be. That's what remains. Long after the script ends, after the candles burn down, after the bells stop ringing, you breathing. Not because you were told to, not because it's easy, but because there's still something left to feel, You wouldn't last a week. You did, and what's more, you listened. And now maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one who remembers. For them, for you, for all of us. Let's end here. No summary, no conclusion, no goodbye. Only a single, honest line, passed quietly between the centuries. You are not alone. There's something strange about time. Not how it passes, but how it returns. You walk away from the medieval city thinking you've left it behind. You think of it like a dream you'll forget by morning. But days later, it finds you again. In a cracked tile. In a candle guttering just before sleep. In the way someone says your name when they're trying not to cry. Time bends, sometimes, and when it does, it lets the past through. A whisper, not a scream, and you remember not the facts, not the kings or wars or treaties, but the feeling of being tired and not stopping, of being scared and still singing, of living in a place that barely holds itself together and choosing deliberately to care anyway. This is what the city gave you, a lens. And now the world looks different, a little slower, a little softer, a little more sacred. You see the woman sweeping her steps and wonder who she lost. You see the man feeding pigeons and wonder who he used to sing to. You see a stranger crying in a train station and you don't look away. Because the city taught you not to. Because some things, grief, mercy, love, don't change with time. They only deepen. And you carry them differently now. Not like wounds, like offerings. You wouldn't last a week. You did more than that. You saw, you felt, you stayed. Let's take one last breath. There's only one part left. The part after the end. There is no return to who you were before. Not really. You may close the book. Shut off the light. Step back into your life. But you are not untouched. You carry the weight of old echoes now. The tenderness of unseen lives. The truth that even in the filth, even in the sorrow, something enduring remains. The will to be kind. And that changes you. Not in dramatic ways. In the smallest ones. You hold a door longer than you used to. You listen to the story no one else wants to hear. You light a candle not for faith, not for ritual, but because someone should remember. You no longer ask, would I have survived there? You ask, can I live better here? Because what you've learned is not how hard life was, but how beautiful it still managed to be. Against reason, against odds, against time. And now you bring that forward. You make space for grief without fixing it. You notice beauty where it isn't supposed to be. You love like the city taught you to, without fanfare, without fear, without needing to be thanked. So here we are, at the edge of the story, where the voice fades, but the memory lingers, where the night is quiet again, where you, still tired, still breathing, finally rest. Thank you for walking with me, for staying this long, for remembering what others forgot. If you carry anything from this, let it be this. What matters most is not how long we last. It's how much of ourselves we leave behind in love. And now, sleep or don't. Either way, you're not alone anymore. And if you've made it all the way here, thank you, truly, for listening, for wondering, for letting the past sit beside you for a while. It means more than you know. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, slow, strange, a little sad but never empty, feel free to subscribe to the channel. No pressure, just if it feels right. And if you're still awake, I hope your night is gentle, that your thoughts are kind, that your dreams are soft. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for watching, and good night.